The winter of 1875 brought more than just snow to White River, Colorado. It brought Eleanor Warner to her breaking point. Standing before the small mirror in her uncle's cramped house, she pinned her chestnut hair beneath a simple bonnet, carefully arranging her features into the vacant expression expected of her. For 3 years, she had hidden her true self behind a mask of demure simplicity, because in White River, a woman with thoughts was more dangerous than a loaded gun. The town had barely stirred to life as Eleanor trudged through the ankle-deep snow toward Briggs' General Store, where she worked 6 days a week. At 22, she had become adept at playing her role, nodding pleasantly, speaking when spoken to, and never, under any circumstances, revealing that she had read every book in her late parents' collection 3 times over, or that she could calculate complex figures faster than most men with a ledger. "Morning, Miss Warner," called Mr. Briggs from behind the counter as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "Them flour sacks need pricing. Think you can handle that simple task today without daydreaming?" "Yes, sir," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice soft, her eyes appropriately lowered. She hung her coat and moved to the storage room, where she began affixing price tags to the new merchandise. Her uncle had made the rules clear when she arrived on his doorstep after her parents died of influenza. "No man wants a wife who thinks she's smarter than him," he'd declared. "Keep your fancy ideas to yourself, or you'll end up alone or worse, in one of them asylums where they put difficult women." So Eleanor learned to bite her tongue when the local schoolteacher misquoted Shakespeare, to feign confusion when tallying numbers in public, and to laugh vacantly at crude jokes she understood all too well. Each night by candlelight, she secretly wrote in journals she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, pouring out her thoughts, her dreams, her frustrations, the only outlet for her stifled mind. The bell chimed again as Eleanor arranged canned goods on the shelf. She didn't turn, knowing better than to appear too interested in the comings and goings of customers. "Heard you got some Winchester rifles in, Briggs," came a deep voice she didn't recognize. "Indeed I have, Mr. Prescott. Finest weapons this side of the Mississippi." Eleanor snuck a glance over her shoulder. The stranger stood with his back to her, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair curling from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His posture suggested confidence, but not arrogance. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but of good quality. "I'll take 2, the stranger said, "and ammunition." "Planning on staying in White River long?" Briggs asked, pulling the rifles from beneath the counter. "Long enough. Bought the old Hargreaves ranch outside town, need to get it up and running before spring." Eleanor's ears perked up at the mention of the Hargreaves place. It had stood empty for over a year, a once beautiful property with the best views of the mountains. She'd often walked past it on her rare days off, imagining what it would be like to live somewhere with room for gardens and orchards. As she stretched to place a can on the top shelf, her foot slipped on the step stool. With a small cry, Eleanor tumbled backward, sending tins of beans clattering across the floor. She landed hard on her backside, pain shooting up her spine. "Miss." In an instant, the stranger was beside her, his strong hands helping her up. "Are you all right?" Eleanor looked up into eyes the color of a summer sky. The face that housed them was handsome, weathered by sun and wind, with a day-old stubble darkening a strong jaw. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30. "I'm fine," she managed, pulling away slightly. "Just clumsy. I'm sorry about the mess." "Eleanor, what have you done now?" Briggs hurried over, his face red with irritation. "Can't trust you with the simplest tasks." "My fault entirely," the stranger cut in smoothly. "I startled the lady." He knelt and began gathering the scattered cans. Eleanor stared in surprise before quickly joining him, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. "Thank you, but you needn't," she began. "I insist." He smiled, and something in Eleanor's chest fluttered in a way it never had before. "Yorke Prescott," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "And you are Eleanor Warner," she whispered back, automatically adopting her practiced vacant expression. But something strange happened. Yorke's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face as if he could see beyond her careful mask. For a terrifying moment, Eleanor feared he could read her thoughts, could see the intelligent woman she concealed. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Warner, he said finally, handing the last can to her. Their fingers touched again, lingering perhaps a moment longer than propriety dictated. Mr. Prescott, if you're done playing gentleman, Briggs called impatiently, your purchase awaits. Yorke stood, tipping his hat to Eleanor before returning to the counter. She hurried to replace the cans, her cheeks warm, aware of his occasional glance in her direction as Briggs completed the transaction. Just as Yorke was about to leave, he turned back. Miss Warner, I understand you folks have a lending library in town. Eleanor nodded, surprised by the question. Would you be kind enough to direct me there? I find myself in need of some reading material for the winter evenings. Before she could respond, Briggs interjected. Eleanor wouldn't know nothing about the library, Mr. Prescott. Girl barely reads beyond inventory lists and struggles with those. He laughed dismissively. Mrs. Hathaway runs the library out of the church basement, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Eleanor fixed her gaze on the floor, shame and anger burning in equal measure. Is that so? Yorke's voice carried an odd note. Well, thank you both. Good day. The bell jingled as he departed, leaving Eleanor with an inexplicable feeling of loss. She returned to her work, silently reciting passages from Paradise Lost to calm her mind words Milton had written about being plunged into darkness, which felt all too appropriate for her existence. That evening, as Eleanor walked home through the deepening twilight, a horse and rider approached from behind. She stepped aside to let them pass, but the rider slowed. Miss Warner. Yorke Prescott tipped his hat, his face half shadowed in the fading light. Mr. Prescott. She nodded politely, continuing her pace. He guided his horse alongside her. May I escort you home? These roads can be treacherous after dark. Thank you, but I know the way well. It's not far. Then perhaps you'd indulge me in conversation until we reach your door. Eleanor hesitated. Walking with a man she barely knew would likely spark gossip, yet something about Yorke Prescott made her throw caution aside. Very well. They proceeded in silence for several moments before Yorke spoke again. Mr. Briggs seems to hold you in rather low esteem. Eleanor stiffened. Mr. Briggs is a fair employer. Fair, perhaps. Accurate in his assessment. I think not. She glanced up sharply. I don't know what you mean, sir. Yorke reined his horse to a stop, forcing Eleanor to pause as well. I noticed something today, Miss Warner. When you thought no one was looking, there was intelligence in your eyes. When Briggs spoke down to you, I saw not confusion, but restraint. He dismounted, bringing himself to eye level with her. Tell me, why does a woman clearly possessed of a keen mind pretend otherwise? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. You're mistaken, she said, falling back on her practiced persona. I'm just a simple shop girl. No, Yorke said firmly, you're not. The way you organized those shelves by category and then alphabetically. The way your eyes moved over the figures in Briggs' ledger when he wasn't looking, correcting his math, perhaps. She took a step back, suddenly frightened. How had he noticed what everyone else had overlooked for years? I mean you no harm, he said, his voice softening. Quite the opposite. I find it refreshing to meet someone with depth in a town that seems determined to remain in the shallows. You don't understand, Eleanor whispered. In White River, a woman must know her place. And what place is that? Hidden, diminished, tears pricked at her eyes. Safe, she managed. Yorke's expression changed, compassion replacing curiosity. I see. He cleared his throat. My apologies for prying, Miss Warner. Please allow me to continue escorting you home. They walked in silence, Yorke leading his horse behind them. When they reached the small house Eleanor shared with her uncle, she paused at the gate. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. The pleasure was mine. He mounted his horse again. I hope our paths cross again, Miss Warner. Good evening, she replied formally, but as she turned toward the house, he spoke once more. Eleanor, she looked back. Your mind is your greatest beauty, remember that. Before she could respond, he rode away, leaving her standing in the growing darkness, his words echoing in her thoughts like forbidden music. Inside, Uncle Morris barely looked up from his newspaper as she entered. You're late. I'm sorry, Uncle. Mr. Briggs had me stay to restock. HMPA. He turned a page noisily. The widow Collins stopped by, said her boy needs tutoring in his sums, offered 50 cents a week. Eleanor carefully hung her coat. That's kind, but I don't think I told her you'd be useless at that, said she'd be better asking Pastor Reed. Eleanor bit her tongue, nodding meekly. Of course. Supper's cold, Uncle Morris added, as if this were her fault too. I'll warm it. She moved to the kitchen, her uncle's dismissal stinging less than usual. Yorke Prescott's words had left an imprint on her soul that seemed to shield her from the familiar barbs. Later that night, as she wrote by candlelight, Eleanor found herself describing the encounter with unusual detail: the blue of his eyes, the strength of his hands, the way he'd seen through her carefully constructed facade. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, and the sensation was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. 3 days passed before Eleanor encountered Yorke again. The temperature had dropped, bringing with it a heavy snowfall that blanketed the town in pristine white. Few customers braved the weather, leaving Eleanor alone to dust shelves and organize inventory while Briggs napped in his chair by the stove. The bell's jingle startled her from her counting. Yorke stamped snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. Their eyes met, and Eleanor quickly looked away, returning to her work. "Afternoon, Miss Warner," he called cheerfully, loud enough to wake Briggs, who snorted and straightened in his chair. "Mr. Prescott, what brings you into town in this weather?" "Supplies," Yorke replied, removing his gloves, "and I need to send some telegrams." He approached the counter, but his eyes kept drifting to Eleanor. "Also thought I might inquire about hiring some help at the ranch. Need someone good with figures, keeping accounts, ordering supplies, that sort of thing." Briggs scratched his beard. "Henderson's boy is good with numbers, just finished schooling. I was thinking of someone with more experience." Yorke glanced meaningfully at Eleanor. "Someone detail-oriented." "Well, not many options in White River, I'm afraid. Most men with those skills already have positions at the bank or work for the mining company." "Perhaps not a man, then." Briggs laughed heartily. "A woman keeping books, that's rich, Prescott." Eleanor kept her head down, measuring coffee beans into paper bags with practiced precision, but her ears burned. "I've known many capable women," Yorke continued evenly. "My mother ran my father's shipping business for years after his death, doubled the profits." "Well, you won't find her like in these parts," Briggs snorted. "Our women are the traditional sort, good for cooking, cleaning, and raising children, just as God intended." Eleanor accidentally spilled coffee beans across the counter, her hands trembling with suppressed anger. "Let me help you with that," Yorke said, moving quickly to her side. As they gathered the scattered beans, he whispered, "Meet me at the church after work, please." She glanced up, startled by the request. His eyes held hers, earnest and warm. "I can't," she murmured. "It's important," he insisted. "I'll wait until 6. Before she could reply, he straightened and returned to Briggs, completing his purchases with easy conversation. As he prepared to leave, loaded with supplies, he nodded politely to Eleanor. "Good day, Miss Warner. I hope we meet again soon." All afternoon, Eleanor debated whether to meet Yorke. Uncle Morris expected her home directly after work, and being seen alone with a man, especially one new to town, would fuel gossip. Yet something in Yorke's expression had suggested urgency, and despite her caution, she found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. At 5 minutes to 6, with the sky already dark, Eleanor told Briggs she needed to stop at the church to deliver a prayer book for her uncle. The lie tasted bitter, but he waved her off without interest. She hurried through the snow, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The small white church stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with lamplight. As she approached, a figure emerged from the shadows of the porch. "You came," Yorke said, relief evident in his voice. "I shouldn't be here," Eleanor replied, glancing nervously around. "If someone sees us, we're at the church, Miss Warner. Nothing improper about that." He gestured to the door. "Shall we go inside? Pastor Reed is visiting the Thompsons' new baby. We'll have privacy." Reluctantly, Eleanor followed him into the empty church. The smell of beeswax candles and old hymnals greeted her, familiar and comforting. Yorke led her to a pew near the front, maintaining a respectful distance as they sat. "Thank you for meeting me," he began. "I wanted to apologize for putting you in an uncomfortable position at the store today." "It's fine," she said automatically. "No, it's not." His expression was serious. "I realized afterward that I may have made things difficult for you. That wasn't my intention." Eleanor studied her gloved hands. "Why did you ask me here, Mr. Prescott?" Yorke reached into his coat and produced a small, leather-bound book. "This is why." He handed it to her. Eleanor turned it over in her hands. "Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman," she read aloud, her pulse quickening. "Where did you get this?" "It belonged to my sister, Abigail." His voice softened. "She was brilliant, studied mathematics, spoke 3 languages. She died 2 years ago of tuberculosis." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said genuinely. "Before she died, she made me promise something." Yorke's gaze held hers steadily. "She made me promise that if I ever encountered another woman forced to hide her intelligence to conform to society's expectations, I would do everything in my power to help her." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "Mr. Prescott, I appreciate the gesture, but I meant what I said about needing help at the ranch," he interrupted. "Real help with accounts and correspondence. I'm offering you a position, Miss Warner, fair wages, respectable work." She stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. Mr. Briggs would never allow it. We could arrange it so you work for me mornings before your shift at the store, or perhaps just Sundays. My uncle would surely approve of you earning additional income for the household." Eleanor shook her head, clutching the book tightly. "You don't understand what you're asking. In White River, a woman who steps outside her place becomes a target. I've seen it happen." Yorke leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Then help me understand. What are you so afraid of?" The question pierced her carefully constructed defenses. For 3 years, Eleanor had buried her true self so deeply she sometimes wondered if that person still existed. Now, sitting in the quiet sanctuary, facing a man who seemed determined to excavate her authentic self, the dam broke. "When I first came to live with my uncle after my parents died, I didn't know to hide who I was," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I corrected the schoolteacher on historical dates. I solved complex equations in my head. I discussed politics and philosophy with anyone who would listen." She paused, swallowing hard. The whispers started. "Unnatural, they called me. Prideful, unmarriageable. Pastor Reed's predecessor suggested I might be influenced by ungodly forces. The doctor offered to treat me for female hysteria. Girls my age avoided me. Men either mocked me or made inappropriate advances, assuming a woman with a mind must also lack morals." Yorke's expression darkened with anger on her behalf. "Then one night, someone threw rocks through my uncle's windows. A note was attached to one, 'Send the witch away or watch her burn.'" Eleanor's voice broke. "My uncle was furious not at the threat, but at me for bringing trouble to his door. He gave me an ultimatum: learn to be a proper, simple woman or find somewhere else to live. With no parents, no money, and no skills society deemed valuable for a woman, what choice did I have? So I learned to play the role. I suppressed every thought, every idea, every spark of intelligence. I became what White River wanted, an empty vessel." Tears slid down her cheeks, but Eleanor made no move to wipe them away. "So you see, Mr. Prescott, your offer, however well-intentioned, asks me to risk everything for. What? The chance to keep accounts for a ranch I'll never own. The temporary satisfaction of being acknowledged as something more than decorative or domestic." Yorke remained silent for a long moment before responding. "What if I could offer you more than temporary satisfaction? What if there was a way out of White River altogether?" Eleanor gave a bitter laugh. "To go where? Do what? The world outside is no more welcoming to women like me than this town is." "That's not entirely true," Yorke said, a new determination in his voice. "My sister attended Oberlin College in Ohio, one of the few that accepts women. Before she died, she was planning to open a girls' school in Denver with a friend. That friend, Miss Catherine Stanton, is still determined to make their dream a reality. She's looking for educated women to help her." Hope flickered briefly in Eleanor's chest before she extinguished it. "I have no formal education, Mr. Prescott, no qualifications. But you have knowledge, intelligence, and clearly a passionate belief in women's capabilities." He gestured to the book in her hands. "Read this. Consider my offer to work at the ranch. It could be a stepping stone, a way to build credentials while saving money. And if the town turns against me again, then I'll stand with you," he said simply. You've faced their cruelty alone before. This time would be different. The church door suddenly opened, letting in a blast of cold air. Both Yorke and Eleanor jumped to their feet as Pastor Reed entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Miss Warner, Mr. Prescott," the pastor exclaimed, clearly surprised. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Mr. Prescott was kind enough to escort me to return a prayer book my uncle borrowed," Eleanor explained quickly, hiding Wollstonecraft's book in the folds of her skirt. "We were just discussing the beautiful craftsmanship of the pews." Pastor Reed's eyes moved between them, suspicious but not overtly hostile. "Indeed. Handcrafted by Mr. Cartwright's father, God rest his soul." He approached them slowly. "Mr. Prescott, I haven't had the chance to welcome you properly to our community. Will we see you at Sunday service?" "You will, Pastor," Yorke replied smoothly. "I was raised to believe in keeping the Sabbath." "Excellent, excellent." The pastor turned to Eleanor. "It's growing late, Miss Warner. Your uncle will be concerned." "Yes, of course. I was just leaving." Eleanor nodded politely to both men. "Good evening." "Allow me to walk you home," Yorke offered. "That won't be necessary," Pastor Reed interjected. "I'm headed that direction myself to check on Mrs. Billings' cough. I'll see Miss Warner safely home." Eleanor and Yorke exchanged a brief look, hers apologetic, his frustrated. "Very well," Yorke conceded. "Good evening, Miss Warner. I hope you'll consider our discussion." "What discussion might that be?" the pastor inquired. "Mr. Prescott needs assistance with his accounts," Eleanor said before Yorke could respond. "He thought I might know someone suitable." "Ah." Pastor Reed nodded. "Henderson's boy just finished schooling. Good head for numbers, so I've heard," Yorke replied dryly. "Good night to you both." As Pastor Reed escorted her through the snowy streets, Eleanor could feel the weight of Wollstonecraft's book pressed against her side. Hidden in her coat, a dangerous secret, but also a lifeline to possibilities she had long abandoned. The next Sunday, Eleanor sat with her uncle in their usual pew, third from the back. The church was fuller than usual. Heavy snow had finally given way to clear skies, and everyone seemed eager to emerge from their homes. Her gaze kept drifting to the door, watching for Yorke. She had spent every free moment of the past week reading Wollstonecraft's work, hiding it beneath her mattress during the day. The words had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years, not just hope, but righteous anger at the injustice of her situation. The congregation rose as Pastor Reed entered, and the service began. Eleanor participated mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Just as the first hymn concluded, the door opened, and Yorke slipped in, nodding apologetically to the pastor for his tardiness. He took a seat in the last pew, directly behind Eleanor. She kept her eyes forward, intensely aware of his presence. During the second reading, she felt something brush against her skirt. Glancing down, she saw a folded note that had been passed beneath the pew. With her uncle engrossed in Pastor Reed's sermon, Eleanor carefully unfolded the paper. "Have you considered my offer?" "YP." She withdrew the small pencil she kept in her prayer book and wrote beneath his question. "Yes, how would it work? EW." When the congregation stood for another hymn, she let the note fall behind her where Yorke's boot discreetly covered it. Minutes later, during a responsive reading, the note returned. "Meet me at the Creek Bridge tomorrow, noon. I'll explain everything." Eleanor's heart raced. The Creek Bridge was a mile outside town, far enough for privacy, but public enough to maintain propriety. Still, meeting a man alone would be risky. She hesitated before writing, "I'll try." After the service, Yorke made a point of introducing himself to various townspeople, including Eleanor and her uncle. "Mr. Warner, Miss Warner," he greeted them formally. "A pleasure to see you again." Uncle Morris, impressed by Yorke's new position as a landowner, responded with unusual warmth. "Welcome to White River, Mr. Prescott. Fine sermon today, wasn't it?" "Most enlightening," Yorke agreed, his eyes briefly meeting Eleanor's. "Miss Warner, I understand from Mr. Briggs that you're quite organized." "I find myself in need of someone to help catalog my late father's book collection, which I've brought from Boston. Might you be interested in some additional work on your days off?" Uncle Morris frowned slightly. "Eleanor's needed at home on Sundays." "It would only be for a few hours," Yorke pressed, "and I'd pay well $1 per session." The mention of money visibly changed Uncle Morris's expression. "Well, I suppose if it's just for a few hours." "Of course, you'd be welcome to accompany her the first time, Mr. Warner, to ensure everything is proper." "That won't be necessary," Uncle Morris said, waving a hand dismissively. "Eleanor knows to behave herself, don't you, girl?" "Yes, Uncle," she replied demurely. "Excellent." "Perhaps next Sunday then," Yorke suggested. "I could send my wagon to collect her after church." The arrangements made, Yorke excused himself to speak with other parishioners. Eleanor stood silently beside her uncle, but inside her mind was racing with possibilities, fears, and a fragile, growing hope. The following day, Eleanor claimed a headache and asked to leave work early. Briggs, annoyed but unwilling to have her coughing near customers, agreed. Instead of heading home, she walked briskly toward the creek bridge, her heart pounding against her ribs. Yorke was already there, standing beside his horse, looking out over the frozen creek. He turned at the sound of her approach, a smile spreading across his features. "You came," he said, echoing his words from their church meeting. "I shouldn't have," Eleanor replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "If anyone sees us, no one will. Most folks are at work or home by their fires on a cold day like this." He gestured to a fallen log cleared of snow. "Shall we sit?" Eleanor perched on the edge of the log, maintaining a proper distance. "I've read the book," she said without preamble, "several times, and it's given me much to consider." She met his gaze directly. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Prescott? Why concern yourself with my situation?" Yorke considered her question carefully. "Partly because of my promise to Abigail, but also because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary trapped in ordinary circumstances. It seems a terrible waste." "So I'm a charity case?" Eleanor asked sharply. "No," he replied firmly. "You're a potential business partner, a possible friend, and—" He stopped, color rising in his face. "Forgive me, I'm getting ahead of myself." The unspoken implication hung between them. Eleanor looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the attraction she felt toward him. It would only complicate an already complex situation. "Tell me about this position," she said instead. "What exactly would I be doing?" Relief crossed Yorke's features at the change of subject. "Initially, organizing my accounts, helping me order supplies, perhaps writing correspondence. The Hargreaves place needs significant work, new fencing, repairs to the barn and house, livestock to purchase. I have capital from selling my share of my father's business, but I need someone detail-oriented to help manage it all. And how would we explain this arrangement to the town? Just as I did to your uncle, cataloging books, organizing papers. Women are allowed to be neat and orderly, aren't they?" A hint of sarcasm colored his tone. "How often?" "When?" "Sundays at first, as we discussed. Perhaps you could develop a sudden interest in learning to read better, giving us reason for additional meetings." Eleanor considered this. "And the real purpose beyond the immediate work would be to build credentials for a position at this school in Denver." "Yes, Miss Stanton is an old friend. Once the school opens next fall, she'll need teaching assistants, an administrator, a librarian. I've already written to her about you." "Without my permission," Eleanor bristled. "Without using your name," Yorke clarified quickly. "I simply inquired whether she might consider someone self-educated with natural intelligence and a passion for learning." And her response: "She said such women are exactly who she hopes to both employ and eventually educate." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a letter, offering it to Eleanor. "See for yourself." She took the letter, scanning its contents. Catherine Stanton's handwriting was decisive, her words passionate about creating opportunities for women beyond traditional roles. She specifically mentioned welcoming self-taught women who could relate to students from similar backgrounds. "This is real," Eleanor whispered, more to herself than to Yorke. "This could actually happen." "It could," he affirmed gently. "But it would require courage, Eleanor. The town will talk, some will oppose you. Are you prepared for that?" She handed the letter back, her jaw set determinedly. "I spent 3 years burying who I am. I'm not sure I can do it any longer, regardless of consequences." "Then you accept the position." Eleanor took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. "I accept." Yorke broke into a wide grin, and for a moment, Eleanor thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he stood and paced excitedly. Excellent. We'll start this Sunday. I'll bring my ledgers, correspondence that needs organizing. We'll need to be careful, of course. Maintain appearances. Of course, Eleanor agreed, standing as well. I should go. Uncle will wonder where I am. Yorke nodded, his expression becoming serious again. Eleanor, I want you to know I mean to keep my word. This isn't. I have no ulterior motives beyond what we've discussed. I never thought you did, she replied, though the possibility had indeed crossed her mind. Men had offered her opportunities before with less honorable intentions. Good, he hesitated. May I escort you part of the way back? We can separate before reaching town. Thank you, but no. Better if we're not seen together until Sunday, when there's a proper explanation for our association. Yorke accepted her decision with a nod. Until Sunday, then. Eleanor turned to leave but paused. Mr. Prescott, Yorke, please, if we're to be colleagues. Yorke. His name felt intimate on her lips. Thank you for seeing me the real me when everyone else had forgotten she existed. Before he could respond, she hurried away, her steps light despite the frozen ground beneath her feet. For the first time in years, Eleanor Warner felt the stirring of something she had thought long dead, not just hope, but possibility. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Eleanor rose before dawn, pressing her best dress and polishing her worn boots until they gleamed. She arranged her hair with unusual care, securing it with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. My, aren't we fancy today? Uncle Morris commented over breakfast. Hoping to catch Mr. Prescott's eye, are we? Eleanor kept her expression neutral. I merely wish to appear professional, Uncle. He's paying good money, after all. Just see you don't get ideas above your station, he warned. Men like Prescott don't marry shop girls. I have no such expectations, she replied truthfully. Marriage was the furthest thing from her mind. Freedom of thought was her current pursuit. After church, Yorke's wagon arrived as promised. Eleanor climbed aboard, intensely aware of the curious stares from townspeople lingering after the service. Yorke handled the horses himself rather than hiring a driver, another point of gossip, no doubt. You look lovely, he said quietly as they pulled away. Thank you. Eleanor kept her gaze forward, unwilling to feed rumors by appearing too familiar. The Hargreaves ranch looked different from when Eleanor had last seen it. The yard had been cleared of debris, and smoke curled from the chimney of the two-story farmhouse. Fresh lumber stacked near the barn suggested repairs were underway. It's not much yet, Yorke said, noticing her appraisal as he helped her down from the wagon, but it has potential. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but clean. A large desk dominated the main room, covered with papers, ledgers, and correspondence. Your book collection? Eleanor asked with a raised eyebrow. Yorke grinned sheepishly. A necessary fiction, though I do have books there in the study. He gestured to a smaller room off the main area. Would you like to see them first, or shall we begin with the accounts? The accounts, Eleanor decided, removing her coat and gloves. That's what I'm here for, after all. For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side. Yorke explaining his plans for the ranch while Eleanor organized his chaotic financial records. His handwriting was nearly illegible, his arithmetic questionable, but his vision was clear to create a sustainable cattle operation that would eventually incorporate innovative breeding techniques he'd read about in agricultural journals. You're quite knowledgeable, Eleanor observed as they reviewed his plans. My father wanted me to join the family shipping business, but I was more interested in agriculture and animal husbandry. I spent 2 years at an experimental farm in Pennsylvania before my sister's illness called me home. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor found herself increasingly comfortable in Yorke's presence. He spoke to her as an equal, valued her suggestions, and never once condescended or simplified his explanations. By the time they broke for the tea he'd prepared, Eleanor had reorganized his ledgers, created a systematic filing method for his correspondence, and drafted a detailed inventory of necessary supplies. You're remarkable, Yorke said, watching her review her work. You've accomplished in hours what would have taken me weeks. Eleanor felt a flush of pride and emotion she hadn't experienced in years. It's nothing extraordinary, just basic organization. It's more than that. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. It's systematic thinking, attention to detail, and anticipation of future needs. You're a natural administrator, Eleanor. She looked up at him, struck by the genuine admiration in his eyes. No one had looked at her that way since her father died, as if her mind were something to be valued rather than suppressed. I should show you the books before you go, Yorke said, breaking the moment. He led her to the study where several crates remained unpacked. Most are practical agriculture, business, some history and science, but there are a few novels and poetry collections as well. Eleanor ran her fingers reverently over the spines of books stacked on a makeshift shelf. May I borrow some, to read at night, of course. Take whatever interests you. She selected several volumes, a treatise on cattle breeding to understand Yorke's business better, a collection of scientific papers, and, almost hesitantly, a volume of Tennyson's poetry. Ambitious choices, Yorke commented with approval. I have much to learn if I'm to be qualified for Miss Stanton's school by fall. The reminder of their larger purpose sobered them both. Yorke checked his pocket watch. We should get you back. I promised your uncle I'd have you home before dark. As they rode back toward town, Eleanor clutched her borrowed books beneath her coat, already anticipating the quiet hours of reading ahead. They had nearly reached White River when Yorke spoke again. Same time next Sunday. Yes, Eleanor agreed. And perhaps I could come on Wednesday as well. I have a half day at the store. Yorke considered this. We'd need a reason for additional meetings so soon. I could tell Uncle you need help preparing for cattle to arrive. Extra pay for extra work. Would he believe that? Eleanor smiled slightly. Uncle believes anything that involves payment. Then Wednesday it is. Yorke slowed the wagon as they approached the town limits. Eleanor, today was. He paused, seemingly struggling for words. It was a pleasure working with you. For me as well, she replied, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. For once, work had felt like freedom rather than confinement. The following weeks established a pattern. Sundays and Wednesday afternoons, Eleanor worked at the Hargreaves Ranch, gradually taking over more responsibilities as Yorke prepared for spring cattle drives. Between meetings, they exchanged notes, brief, business-like communications that nonetheless became the highlight of Eleanor's days. Lumber arrived for barn repairs. Need your help calculating costs vs budget. YP. Supply order from Denver requires revision. We'll bring calculations Wednesday. EW, in town, they maintained a strictly professional relationship, nodding politely when their paths crossed. But at the ranch, their conversations ranged from ranch management to literature, philosophy to politics, discussions that left Eleanor intellectually invigorated and increasingly aware of Yorke not just as an employer, but as a man. By late February, rumors began to circulate. Eleanor heard the whispers when she entered the general store, saw the knowing glances exchanged between customers. Spending an awful lot of time at that ranch, isn't she? Always did think she was putting on airs. Poor Mr. Prescott probably doesn't realize what he's getting into with that one. Briggs became increasingly critical of her work, watching her closely for mistakes. Uncle Morris, however, remained satisfied as long as Yorke's payments continued money that Eleanor secretly divided, sending half to a bank in Denver under her own name. One Wednesday in early March, Eleanor arrived at the ranch to find Yorke in conversation with a visitor, Mayor Thompson, whose wife was among the town's most notorious gossips. Ah, Miss Warner, the mayor greeted her with false joviality. Mr. Prescott was just explaining the unique arrangement you two have. Eleanor froze, clutching her satchel of papers. Good afternoon, Mayor Thompson. I was telling the mayor how invaluable your organizational skills have been, Yorke said smoothly, showing him the filing system you've implemented. Indeed, Thompson replied, his tone skeptical. Most progressive of you, Prescott, employing a female clerk. I believe in utilizing talent wherever I find it, Yorke responded, his voice pleasant but firm. Miss Warner has saved me considerable time and money with her efficient methods. The mayor's gaze moved between them, clearly unconvinced. Well, I should be going. Mrs. Thompson expects me for dinner. He retrieved his hat. Good day to you both. After he left, Eleanor sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly. He doesn't believe you." "It doesn't matter what he believes," Yorke replied, though his expression was troubled. "We've done nothing improper." "Propriety isn't just about actions, it's about perceptions," Eleanor said bitterly. "Mayor Thompson's wife controls the social circle of White River. If she decides I'm compromised, it won't matter what the truth is." Yorke paced the room, agitated. "Perhaps we should be more careful, meet less frequently." Perhaps. The thought brought an unexpected pang of disappointment. Their meetings had become essential to Eleanor's happiness, not just for the intellectual freedom they provided, but for Yorke's company itself. "Or," Yorke said suddenly, stopping his pacing, "we could give them something legitimate to discuss." "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his expression intense. "Come work for me officially. Full-time, live in the caretaker's cottage on the property, no more sneaking around, no more pretending." Eleanor stared at him in shock. "Leave the store, leave my uncle's house." "Yorke, the scandal would be temporary," he finished. "People gossip, then they find new topics. Meanwhile, you'd be free to work openly, to read, to think, to prepare for Denver. My uncle would never allow it. You're 22, Eleanor. Legally, you don't need his permission." She stood, pacing as he had moments before. "Even if that's true, where would that leave my reputation? An unmarried woman living on the property of an unmarried man. I'd be considered ruined." Yorke ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. What if we had a chaperone, Mrs. Benson from the edge of town is a widow in need of work. She could live in the main house as housekeeper, provide respectability." Eleanor considered this possibility. A proper chaperone might mitigate the worst of the gossip, but still. "I don't know, Yorke. It's a significant risk. More significant than continuing as we are, with rumors already spreading." He approached her, stopping just short of taking her hands. "Eleanor, I've watched you these past weeks. You've come alive. Your mind, your spirit, they're extraordinary when unbound. Can you really go back to hiding after experiencing freedom?" His words struck a chord deep within her. Could she return to the cage she'd built around herself? Pretend she wasn't capable of more, that she didn't yearn for the intellectual stimulation and sense of purpose she'd found at the ranch? "Let me think about it," she finally said. "It's not a decision to make hastily." Yorke nodded, respecting her caution. "Of course, take whatever time you need." They worked in relative silence that afternoon, both preoccupied with thoughts of the future. As Yorke drove her back to town, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising more snow. "I've received a letter from Miss Stanton," he said as they neared White River. "The school is progressing well. Construction begins next month." Eleanor nodded, unable to muster enthusiasm despite the good news. "That's wonderful." She asked specifically about you, or rather, about the unnamed woman I'd mentioned. "She's very interested in meeting you." "Is she?" Eleanor replied distractedly, watching the approaching storm. Yorke glanced at her with concern. "What's troubling you beyond our earlier discussion? Something else is weighing on your mind." Eleanor hesitated, then decided honesty was required. "I'm wondering if I've been foolish, Yorke, if I've allowed myself to hope for something impossible." "Nothing you aspire to is impossible, isn't it?" She turned to face him. "Even if I manage to reach Denver, even if Miss Stanton hires me, what then? I'll still be a woman in a world designed for men. I'll still face the same prejudices, the same limitations, just in a different town." Yorke guided the horses to a stop on the outskirts of town. "Eleanor, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his gaze. "The world is changing," he said earnestly. "Slowly, yes, but changing nonetheless. Women like Miss Stanton, like my sister, they're creating spaces where minds like yours can flourish. It won't be easy, but it's far from impossible." "And what about?" Eleanor paused, unsure how to express the other concern growing in her heart. "What about personal happiness? Is that possible for women who choose an unconventional path?" Yorke's expression softened. "You mean marriage, family?" She nodded, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "I believe," he said carefully, "that true partnership between equals is not only possible but preferable. A man secure in himself would value a woman's intelligence rather than feel threatened by it." Something in his tone made Eleanor's heart beat faster. "Such men are rare, perhaps not as rare as you think." His eyes held hers, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibility. The spell was broken by distant thunder. Yorke clicked to the horses, continuing toward town. "Consider my offer, Eleanor. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her down from the wagon at the edge of town. That night, as the storm raged outside her window, Eleanor made a decision. She would accept Yorke's offer not just for the opportunity it presented for her future, but for the chance to live authentically in the present. The townspeople would talk, her uncle would rage, but she would no longer hide her true self to appease others. The following morning, Eleanor approached Briggs before opening hours. "Mr. Briggs, I must give notice. I'll be leaving at the end of the week." Briggs looked up from his ledger, spectacles perched on his nose. "Leaving? What nonsense is this?" "I've accepted a position as Mr. Prescott's ranch administrator." The storekeeper's mouth fell open, then closed with a snap. "Ranch administrator," he sputtered. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Eleanor maintained her composure despite the insult. "Mr. Prescott values my organizational abilities and attention to detail. I'll be living in the caretaker's cottage with Mrs. Benson as chaperone." "Have you lost your mind, girl? No decent man will ever marry you after this." "Perhaps I don't wish to marry a man who considers independence indecent," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Briggs rose from his chair, face reddening. "Get out. Now. Don't expect a reference from me, and don't come crawling back when Prescott tires of you." Eleanor calmly retrieved her coat and personal items before walking out of the general store for the last time. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, with exhilaration. Uncle Morris's reaction was predictably worse. He shouted, threatened to disown her, predicted her ruin and disgrace. When these tactics failed to sway her, he resorted to sullen silence, refusing to help her pack her few belongings. "I'll send money each month," Eleanor promised as she prepared to leave. "More than I contributed from my store wages. Keep your money," he spat. "I want nothing from a woman who brings shame to her family name." The words stung, but Eleanor had anticipated them. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Uncle. I'll always be grateful for the roof you provided when I had nowhere else to go." He turned away without response, and Eleanor left the house that had never truly been home, her possessions packed in a single trunk. Yorke was waiting with his wagon at the arranged meeting spot outside town. When he saw her walking alone, dragging her trunk, he jumped down to help her. "Your uncle wouldn't bring you?" he asked, lifting the trunk easily into the wagon. "He made his feelings quite clear," Eleanor replied, brushing away an unexpected tear. "As did Mr. Briggs." Yorke's expression darkened. "I'm sorry. Perhaps this was selfish of me to suggest." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "This was my choice, the first real choice I've made in years. I won't regret it, whatever comes." The caretaker's cottage proved to be a small but comfortable two-room structure that had recently been repaired and furnished. Mrs. Benson, a no-nonsense widow in her 60s, had already taken residence in the main house and prepared a welcome meal. "Don't you worry about wagging tongues, Miss Warner," the older woman said as they ate. "I raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. I know virtue when I see it, and I've no patience for gossip." "Thank you, Mrs. Benson," Eleanor replied, warmed by the unexpected support. "Mr. Prescott says you're educated," Mrs. Benson continued. "Perhaps you might teach me to read better in the evenings. I never got past the basics." Eleanor glanced at Yorke, who watched the exchange with obvious pleasure. "I'd be honored to help you, Mrs. Benson." That night, alone in her new home, Eleanor stood at the window, looking out at the vast expanse of land surrounding the ranch. Stars glittered overhead, undiminished by town lights. For the first time since her parents' death, she felt a sense of possibility, of space to grow, to think, to become fully herself. The following weeks brought significant changes. With Eleanor handling administrative tasks, correspondence, and accounts, Yorke was free to focus on the physical improvements to the ranch. The first cattle arrived, a small herd to start, with plans for expansion. Eleanor learned about breeding records, feed calculations, and weather predictions that would affect grazing patterns. Each evening, she returned to her cottage tired but fulfilled. 3 times a week, she taught Mrs. Benson to read, finding unexpected joy in sharing knowledge. On Sundays, rather than attending church in White River where she knew she'd face hostility, Eleanor and Yorke took turns reading aloud from various texts, sometimes the Bible, sometimes Shakespeare, sometimes scientific journals. As predicted, rumors spread through White River. When Eleanor ventured into town for supplies, she faced cold stares and whispered comments. Pastor Reed paid a visit to express concern for her immortal soul. Mayor Thompson's wife orchestrated a committee of concerned citizens who sent a letter suggesting Yorke reconsider his inappropriate staffing decisions if he wished to be accepted in the community. Yorke tossed the letter into the fire without response. But as spring arrived, bringing new growth to the land, something unexpected began to happen. The productivity of the Prescott Ranch became evident. Yorke's innovative breeding techniques drew interest from other ranchers. His fair business practices earned respect from merchants in neighboring towns. Gradually, pragmatism began to outweigh moral indignation. When Yorke needed additional hands for spring roundup, men who initially refused to work for him reconsidered when they heard his wages. When he donated generously to repair the church roof, Pastor Reed found it harder to condemn him from the pulpit. And when Eleanor's organizational system helped identify a calculation error that saved the town council from a costly mistake in their lumber order for the new schoolhouse, even Mayor Thompson grudgingly acknowledged her unexpected competence. Through it all, Eleanor and Yorke maintained a strictly professional relationship in public. But in private, their friendship deepened into something more profound. They shared ideas, dreams, frustrations, and increasingly lingering glances that communicated feelings beyond friendship. One evening in late April, they sat on the porch of the main house, reviewing the day's work as the sun set over the mountains. Mrs. Benson had retired early with a headache, leaving them alone. "The last of the fencing will be complete tomorrow," Yorke said, reviewing Eleanor's detailed project list. "We're ahead of schedule and under budget. The new breeding records are organized as well," Eleanor added. "I've created a system to track bloodlines that should make selection easier next season." Yorke set aside the papers, turning to face her. "You've transformed this place, Eleanor, not just the operations, but—" He gestured around them. "Everything," she smiled, warmed by his praise. "We did it together. I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A thank you for all you've done." Eleanor unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautiful fountain pen with her initials engraved on its silver cap. "Yorke, it's exquisite. I noticed your old one was running dry. A ranch administrator needs proper tools." She ran her fingers over the engraving, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you." Their eyes met, and something in Yorke's expression made Eleanor's breath catch. He leaned forward slightly, then seemed to think better of it, pulling back with a small, regretful smile. "I should check on the new calves before dark," he said, standing abruptly. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night," she replied, watching him walk away, an unfamiliar ache in her chest. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She paced her small cottage, the new pen clutched in her hand, thinking about Yorke not as her employer or her friend, but as a man she had grown to care for deeply. She had avoided acknowledging these feelings, focusing instead on their professional relationship and her plans for Denver. But now, with Miss Stanton's school nearing completion and her departure only months away, Eleanor could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Yorke Prescott. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. To act on such feelings would complicate everything they'd worked for: her independence, her future in Denver, the respect they'd fought to establish in the community. Yet to ignore them seemed increasingly impossible. Morning brought no clarity, only a determination to maintain professionalism despite her inner turmoil. Eleanor threw herself into work, meticulously avoiding being alone with Yorke. A week passed in this fashion before Yorke finally confronted her in the ranch office. "Have I offended you in some way?" he asked bluntly as she prepared to leave for the day. Eleanor looked up, startled. "Of course not. Why would you think that? You barely speak to me except about ranch business. You leave rooms when I enter them. Something has changed." She busied herself gathering papers, unable to meet his gaze. "Nothing's changed. I'm simply focused on completing everything before." She hesitated. Before Denver, he finished for her. Miss Stanton's latest letter mentioned August for your arrival. Eleanor nodded, still not looking at him. There's much to do before then. Eleanor. Yorke's voice was gentle but insistent. Please look at me. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. If you've changed your mind about going, it would be understandable. You've built something remarkable here. I haven't changed my mind, she said quickly, too quickly. Yorke studied her face, seeming to search for something. I see. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. May I ask you something, Eleanor? Something personal, she tensed but nodded. Are you avoiding me because you're afraid of what's growing between us? The directness of his question stole her breath. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. He took a step closer. I think you feel it too, this connection that's become more than friendship, more than professional respect. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. I'm still leaving in August. Does it have to be either slash or? Yorke asked, his voice low. Your dreams or? Isn't that always the choice for women? Eleanor replied, emotion finally breaking through her careful control. Family or fulfillment, love or independence, men don't have to choose. I'm not asking you to choose, Yorke said, taking another step toward her. I'm asking if we can find a path that honors both. Eleanor shook her head, confused by his meaning. I don't understand. What if I went with you to Denver? The suggestion was so unexpected that Eleanor could only stare at him. The ranch is established now, Yorke continued. I could hire a manager. Denver needs cattle suppliers. I could establish a business there while you work with Miss Stanton. You would leave everything you've built here. For me, for us, he corrected gently. For the possibility of a partnership based on mutual respect and... He paused, gathering courage. And love. The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Yorke, Eleanor began, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected declaration. Before she could continue, the office door burst open, and one of the ranch hands appeared, breathless and agitated. Mr. Prescott, fire in the north pasture. Lightning strike from that storm moving in. The moment shattered, Yorke was instantly alert. Round up the men. We need to create a fire break before it reaches the main grazing land. Eleanor moved into action as well, years of hiding her capabilities forgotten in the crisis. I'll send riders to neighboring ranches for help. You'll need more men. Yorke nodded, already pulling on his coat. Be careful, he said, his eyes conveying everything they hadn't had time to discuss. Then he was gone, racing toward the growing smoke on the horizon, leaving Eleanor with decisions far more complex than fire containment strategies. The fire burned through the night, consuming nearly 50 acres of grazing land before it was contained. Eleanor worked alongside everyone else, dispatching riders, organizing water brigades, preparing food for exhausted men, calculating the fire's potential path based on wind direction. By dawn, the danger had passed, leaving a blackened scar across the land but no damage to structures or livestock. The men, including several from neighboring ranches who had come to help, gathered at the main house for coffee and food. Eleanor moved among them, pouring coffee, addressing them by name, discussing how the burned area might actually benefit from the natural clearing. She was too tired to maintain her usual reserve, too focused on helping to worry about appearances. It wasn't until she overheard two ranch hands talking that she realized how much had changed. Never seen a woman with such a head on her shoulders, one said. Figured out that wind shift before any of us. Prescott's lucky to have her, the other replied. My Bessie's smart too, but I never let her show it much. Maybe I should. You should, Yorke said, joining their conversation. A woman's mind is a terrible thing to waste on just cooking and cleaning. The men looked embarrassed to be overheard but nodded respectfully. Later, as the last helpers departed and Mrs. Benson finally succumbed to exhaustion, Eleanor found Yorke on the porch, staring at the distant smoldering remains of the fire. You should rest, she said, joining him. You've been up for nearly 2 days. So have you, he replied, his voice rough from smoke and fatigue. I've asked Jackson to ride into town for supplies tomorrow. We'll need to recalculate the summer grazing rotation with the north pasture temporarily unusable. Yorke turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the early morning light. "You were amazing last night, Eleanor. You didn't hide not once. You led, calculated, strategized, all without hesitation." She hadn't considered this but realized he was right. In the crisis, she'd forgotten to play small. "I suppose I did. And did you notice, not one man questioned you. Not one treated your intelligence as threatening or inappropriate. They were too busy fighting fire to worry about propriety," Eleanor reasoned. Perhaps, or perhaps when people see genuine capability, prejudice becomes harder to maintain. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "About what I said before the fire." Eleanor's exhaustion fell away, her full attention on Yorke and the warmth of his hand around hers. "About coming to Denver." "Yes, I meant it, Eleanor, every word." She studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the hope and uncertainty in his expression. "Yorke, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Always. Are you offering this because you believe in my abilities or because you've developed feelings for me? Because if it's the latter, I couldn't bear to think you were sacrificing your dreams for both," he interrupted. "It's both, Eleanor. I admire your mind, your determination, your courage. And yes, I've fallen in love with you not despite your intelligence, but because of it, among so many other qualities." He stepped closer, still holding her hand. "But I'm not sacrificing anything. Dreams change, evolve. Mine now include building something meaningful with you, wherever that takes us." Eleanor's carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. She had spent so long protecting herself from rejection, from being seen as too much, that accepting Yorke's his love for her complete, undiminished self seemed almost impossible. Yet here he stood, offering exactly that. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I have for some time now." Joy transformed Yorke's tired face. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll find our way forward together, Denver," she asked. "If that's still what you want." Eleanor considered this carefully. "Miss Stanton's school represents everything I've dreamed of, the chance to help other women unlock their potential, to be part of something transformative." "Then Denver it is," Yorke said without hesitation. "But," she continued, "perhaps not immediately. There's still work to be done here, the ranch, the community." She paused, gathering courage for her next words. "And us. I'd like time for us to build something here first, to show White River what's possible when women's minds are valued rather than feared." Yorke's smile widened. "Miss Stanton's school will still be there next year, or the year after. You'd be willing to wait." "Eleanor," he said seriously, "I'd wait however long necessary, but more importantly, I want to walk beside you, not direct your path." Overcome with emotion, Eleanor did what she'd longed to do for weeks. She stepped forward and kissed him. It was a brief, tender meeting of lips, but it contained promises that words alone couldn't express. When they parted, Yorke's eyes were bright with emotion. "I should have done that the day you organized my chaotic ledgers." Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I would have questioned your professional intentions, Mr. Prescott, and rightly so." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders as they looked out at the sunrise, painting the mountains gold and crimson. "What happens now? First we sleep," Eleanor said practically. "Then we rebuild what the fire destroyed, planned for summer, and—" She hesitated. "And," Yorke prompted, "and perhaps we discuss a more permanent partnership, one that would silence even Mrs. Thompson's gossip." Yorke's arm tightened around her. "Eleanor Warner, are you proposing to me?" "Suggesting a future discussion of possibilities," she corrected, eyes twinkling with mischief. "A woman must maintain some mystery after all," he laughed, pulling her close. "I look forward to that discussion, Miss Warner, very much indeed." As they stood together watching the new day dawn, Eleanor thought of the frightened girl who had hidden her true self for years, who had dimmed her light to make others comfortable. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that her mind truly was her greatest beauty, and who had found a partner who not only recognized that truth, but celebrated it. 3 months later, on a perfect summer evening, Eleanor Warner became Eleanor Prescott in a small ceremony at the ranch. Pastor Reed officiated, having gradually come to respect the couple's unconventional but undeniably positive influence on the community. Mrs. Benson wept happy tears. Even Uncle Morris attended, his grudging presence a small victory. Most surprising were the wedding gifts from townspeople who had once whispered behind Eleanor's back books for her growing library. A beautiful desk from Mr. Briggs, delivered with a gruff apology. And a letter from the town council offering Eleanor a position helping to establish White River's first proper school, where girls would be encouraged to study mathematics and sciences alongside boys. As Yorke and Eleanor danced under lantern light, surrounded by friends who had come to value them both for who they truly were, he whispered in her ear, "Are you happy, Mrs. Prescott?" Eleanor looked up at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued what others feared, who had offered partnership instead of ownership. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Denver next year?" he asked, spinning her gracefully. "Denver or wherever we decide to make our mark," she replied. "Together." Years later, Eleanor would sit at her desk in the study they shared, writing letters to young women across Colorado who sought admission to the school. She and Catherine Stanton had finally established in White River itself a progressive institution that drew students from 3 states and employed teachers who believed, as Eleanor did, that a woman's mind was her greatest asset. Yorke would bring her tea, pausing to kiss the top of her head before checking on their 2 children, a daughter with her mother's quick mind, and a son with his father's gentle heart, both being raised to value intelligence regardless of gender. And each night, Eleanor would think back to that moment in the general store when a stranger had looked beyond her carefully constructed mask and seen the woman she truly was, the moment that had set her free to become not just the person she'd hidden, but someone far greater than she'd ever imagined possible.